on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My family left me without an inheritance to give it all to my sister, but my grandfather witnessed everything, and 4 months later, karma came in a devastating way. That night, I arrived at my parents' house with anxiety churning inside me. It was one of those family gatherings where everyone appears impeccably dressed, exchanging courtesies that sounded artificial. The reason for the gathering. My parents hinted that they would discuss the future of their assets, a topic avoided for years. I had no hope, however. Experience had taught me that I usually came out of these gatherings feeling marginalized. My sister Tanya already had everyone's attention, savoring the compliments with a smug smile that suggested privileged knowledge. Watching her, I felt the familiar twinge of being upstaged. Tanya was always the favorite, spoiled and praised no matter what. I, on the other hand, learned early on that only hard work and self-reliance would sustain me. The formalities went on until my father tapped his glass, demanding attention. My mother remained by his side, her face shining with enthusiasm that immediately alerted me. They began their announcement grandly, talking about family legacy and the value of the future of our blood. I listened, my nerves tensing with each word. Then the bombshell. They were giving all their property to Tanya. Not half, not even a small portion for me, all of it. My ears were ringing as I tried to process their justification. My father claimed that Tanya needed more support because she was the youngest, as if her age made her incapable of fending for herself. My mother added praise about Tanya's supposed future plans and how the property would facilitate those projects. Then, almost as an afterthought, they turned to me and said that they considered me independent enough to manage without help. My father even suggested that I should try harder to succeed, as if my years of dedication meant absolutely nothing. The room seemed to close in around me. I managed to ask why they considered this fair, my voice trembling despite my attempts to remain calm. My father dismissed me with a condescending smile, dismissing my concerns. He said it wasn't about fairness but about doing what was best for the family. Tanya, of course, couldn't resist the temptation to add insult to injury. She made scathing comments about how she had earned this with her big plans, and how I didn't need the burden of managing the property. Her tone was sweet, but her words were sharp, cutting deeper than imaginable. I wanted to scream, demand answers, express how her decision made me feel strange in my own family. But what was the point? The decision had been made, and no amount of arguing would change the fact that I was once again being relegated. The rest of those present looked on in uncomfortable silence, visibly disturbed but not intervening. I noticed sympathetic looks from distant relatives, but no one spoke. I stood there, stunned and humiliated, while my parents and Tanya reveled in their self-satisfaction. A heavy silence permeated the atmosphere, the kind that follows an unexpected explosion. I was still mentally processing my parents' announcement. Tanya, in front of me, radiated arrogance, her victory marked on every feature of her face. I wanted to escape from that suffocating tension, but before I could move, my grandfather cleared his throat. It was a discreet sound that cut the tension like a knife. All eyes converged on him. He had remained silent all night, sitting at the end of the table with what I assumed was disinterest. But now, his expression showed sharpness, his eyes fixed on my parents with a serene intensity that carried a warning. He declared that he had heard enough. His firm voice carried an undeniable weight. My father tried to protest, starting to say something about it not being his place to have an opinion. But my grandfather raised a hand to silence him. He asked my father to let him finish and said that this farce had gone on for too long. A collective murmur of confusion arose when he reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. My heart was beating fast for no apparent reason. With deliberate movements, he wrote something on a check, got up and walked towards me. He placed it in my trembling hands. He announced that the check was for me, $2 million, his personal gift. His voice echoed around the room with a definitive air. Everyone seemed petrified. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. I stared at the check in disbelief, taking in the weight of the gesture. Tanya broke the silence first. Her shrill voice demanded to know what was going on. She mentioned justice, asking why I was receiving this money and not her. Grandfather's gaze turned to her, penetrating and unwavering. He told her that if she wanted to talk about justice, then they should discuss it properly. His words were sharp, charged with a controlled anger that made everyone sit up straight. He turned to my parents, his voice rising slightly. He said that for years he had watched them pamper Tanya, allowing her selfishness while ignoring all the effort I had put in to build something for myself. My mother blushed with embarrassment. My father's face twitched uncomfortably. They began to mutter something about Tanya being younger and needing more support, but Grandpa interrupted them sharply. He said that age was irrelevant in this matter. He denounced their obvious favoritism and declared that it was all about character. He pointed at Tanya, saying that they had inflated her ego until she believed the world owed her everything. Tanya gasped in disbelief, trying to defend herself. She argued that she had also worked hard, even if no one had noticed. Grandfather stared at her, asking her to name a single thing that she had really worked hard at. He said that all he had seen was her spending money and making empty promises about plans that were never fulfilled. He said that if she considered that hard work, then she was more disoriented than he thought. My parents tried to intervene again, saying they had the right to decide about their property, but Grandpa dismissed them. He said they were free to make their decisions and he was free to make his. He explained that the money was my reward for resilience and integrity, qualities he had always valued but rarely seen recognized in our family. Tears stung my eyes, not for the money, but for the validation. For the first time, someone had recognized my efforts, my struggles, and my courage. Unable to contain her emotions, Tanya pounded her hands on the table, demanding that Grandpa explain himself again. She insisted that this was an insult, not only to her, but to the whole family. She accused me of somehow manipulating Granddad to get the money. I could feel my face burning with frustration. Manipulation. I had silently endured his obvious favoritism for years, his constant disregard for my efforts, and now I was the manipulator. My parents intervened in support of Tanya, their voices rising as they tried to convince Granddad to reconsider. My father claimed that rewarding me in this way would create unnecessary divisions in the family. My mother added that Tanya was still young and needed guidance, not punishment. Their words reeked of hypocrisy. I had already endured enough. I refused to remain silent. I told them that this supposed division had always existed, but they ignored it because it suited them. I reminded them how they had belittled me for choosing to work hard, while praising Tanya for doing nothing. I asked them how they could accuse me of greed when they had just handed over all their wealth to her under the pretext of justice. Tanya responded by calling me ungrateful and petty, claiming that I envied her success. Success? I laughed bitterly, telling her that living on charity and demanding more was not success but privilege. The argument escalated with Tanya throwing a tantrum, shouting about how unfair life was and how I had always been jealous of her. My parents tried to blame me for escalating the situation, saying that I should be grateful for what I had. Then Granddad intervened again. He raised his voice louder than I had ever heard him. Silencing the room, he told my parents that they had no right to talk about fairness or family unity when they had spent years fostering this toxic dynamic. He reminded Tanya that nothing in life was guaranteed and warned that her sense of privilege would be her downfall. His words shocked everyone, including me, albeit for different reasons. As the room fell silent, I realized that this was no longer just about money. It was about finally being seen, finally being heard. Tanya, naturally, couldn't let it go. She lamented the injustice. She asked if she didn't deserve something too. Grandpa's tone turned glacial when he told her that she had already been given everything on a silver platter. However, she continued to complain. He added that I was lucky he hadn't completely stripped my parents of their inheritances to give them to me. The room erupted into chaos. My parents were shouting. Tanya was on the verge of tears, and the rest of the family was whispering furiously to each other. Throughout it all, Granddad remained calm, having clearly stated his position. Before leaving, he turned to me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. He advised me to use the money wisely and left the room without another word. His departure left a stunned silence. Nothing that had happened erased years of neglect or pain. But I want to keep the check. What should I do? Update 1. A week had passed since that chaotic family gathering, and the atmosphere was still charged. It wasn't just the argument that lingered, but its consequences, the true impact of what had happened. I was still processing the conversation with my parents, how they dismissed me as if I were insignificant, as if all my years of effort were worth nothing compared to my sister's sense of privilege. I was exhausted. Then, one afternoon, my grandfather appeared unexpectedly at my door. His presence brought a sense of calm that I didn't know I needed. He examined my modest living room, absorbing the space, then looked at me as if perceiving me in a new light. He always possessed that serene elegance. He never got involved in conflicts. But this time, he didn't hold back. He entered saying little. His presence was comforting. Finally, after a pause, he spoke more softly than usual. He said he simply wanted to check on me after what had happened. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. I sighed, half laughing, half sighing, telling him that I was as well as could be expected. It had been difficult, certainly, but I was managing. I didn't want to overload him, so I was brief, avoiding going into detail about the persistent pain. He didn't insist. He simply nodded sympathetically. But then he looked at me seriously. He confessed that he should have intervened earlier, denounced how my parents treated me, how they always praised my sister while ignoring my efforts. It was hard to hear him say this, but his words sounded sincere. I told him that I did not expect him to intervene. I had always known his nature and had made my peace with it. But it still hurt, especially now, seeing how little they valued me. Grandfather nodded again. His expression softened. He said that I should never allow them to define my worth, that I had earned what was due to me. Then he calmly explained that I didn't need to keep seeking his approval. I now had a real opportunity to build something of my own with the money granted. He said that I had the power to create my future, and that the use of that money was at my discretion. I asked him, however, how to proceed. If it was really okay to use the money, what would happen if I failed? What if I didn't know what to do with it? He smiled at me, not condescendingly, but with his characteristic patient wisdom. He assured me not to worry about wasting it. The important thing was to take my time, consider my options carefully, and seek help when I needed it. He would be there for me every step of the way, guiding me if I wanted him to. We talked for a few more hours about my options, investments, potential uses for the $2 million. He suggested I meet with financial advisors, look for mentoring opportunities, and continue learning. It was a lot to take in, but I felt relieved as we talked. I wasn't alone in this. I had an ally who truly believed in me. When he got up to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare, affectionate gesture. He told me he was proud of me, that he always had been, and that I should never forget it. Update 2. 4 months had passed, and circumstances had certainly changed. My sister, having assumed full control of the property, was already overwhelmed. I would never have imagined it, but she managed to turn what should have been a smooth transition into a disaster. She wasn't even without resources. Everything was handed to her on a plate, but I suppose when you receive everything effortlessly, what incentive is there to ensure it lasts? First, he decided to liquidate most of the family assets, claiming necessary improvements to the property. A cousin informed me that he had sold numerous antique pieces of furniture, family heirlooms that dated back decades, simply to redecorate. And the renovations? He chose extravagant and overpriced contractors, promising them generous rewards. They took his money and completed half the work. Her stubbornness prevented her from listening to advice about proceeding calmly and planning properly. Meanwhile, the debts were mounting. She didn't even notice when the cash was running out. My parents, predictably, remained blind to her failings. They continued to defend her, claiming that she was doing her best and that the family should show more solidarity, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. News spread quickly. Not dramatically, but the comments began. as they always do. The family's financial problems inevitably began to manifest themselves. Some business partners withdrew. After learning of the situation, distant relatives who had previously admired my parents for their stability began to distance themselves. They did not wish to be associated with those who could not stand firm. I continued to receive occasional small updates about mistreatment with contractors or how he spent an entire month hiring consultants who offered vague advice while emptying bank accounts. It was embarrassing to witness. I couldn't help feeling a certain satisfaction, however. I knew I wouldn't be able to handle what I had received and would eventually face the consequences. But the most shocking thing was discovering that my parents were trying to cover up part of the disaster by hiding financial documents and pretending normality. They were already pretending to act as if nothing had changed, as if the whole world hadn't witnessed the collapse of their prized possession. I did not witness the outcome. I did not need to be present. I had long since distanced myself from that circus, but occasionally I would receive calls from relatives asking about the family. Some even offered condolences for the adverse circumstances, calling my sister unfortunate. The family reputation was not simply tarnished, it was destroyed. And strangely, I found myself almost happy. Those who had looked down on me for so long were now facing the consequences of their own bad decisions. And I bore no responsibility whatsoever. For a while, I just let everything take its course. It was no longer my problem. I had my own life to focus on. It was better that way. Am I being overly vindictive to be happy about this? Update 3. Each decision seemed worse than the last, from depleting resources on unnecessary luxuries to alienating all those who could help her. I wasn't surprised. But I can't deny the stupidity of my parents in continuing to indulge her. What followed was inevitable. News spread of mounting debts, useless and unpaid contractors, and missing assets. More businesses that were part of the family portfolio withdrew, refusing to have anything to do with a sinking ship. The calls that my parents were avoiding finally reached a critical point when creditors started to show up. The bills piled up. The lawyers got involved. I heard all this indirectly. People I hadn't spoken to in years were happy to share the rumors, and apparently every other day there was some new update. But the most shocking thing, it wasn't my family's fall from grace. It was the call I got from my mother that night. We hadn't spoken since that meeting. I hadn't even made time for her. But there she was, calling me as if nothing had happened, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Her voice contained that unmistakable, desperate undertone. She informed me that things were getting worse, but they were working on a solution. But she didn't ask for help immediately. Instead, she made veiled pleas about how they were trying to fix everything. She didn't need to explain much. It was clear that they were close to losing everything. Then he changed his tone exactly as I anticipated. He manipulated the guilt as he usually did. He tried to make it seem as if they had simply not foreseen it, as if their own decisions had taken them by surprise. "You know, we always thought you'd be there for us," he said, almost trying to make me feel guilty. I remained silent for a long time, waiting for him to reveal his intention. Eventually he asked, not at all subtly, if I could help. There was a catch, obviously. He didn't say please, nor did he acknowledge that the whole disaster started because of their bad choices. No, he made it seem like I owed them something now. "You have the money, don't you? Maybe you could help the family." I was furious, but I held back. I just hung up. It was better not to deal with manipulation. I hadn't forgotten her words, the things they said to me about trying harder and earning my own success. I hadn't forgotten how my mother dismissed me so easily, how my sister celebrated her undeserved victory. And then, as I expected, my sister called. I didn't answer. Her voicemail message was similar but with a manipulative undertone. She began by apologizing, claiming stress and mistakes. She described the gravity of the situation, begging me to intervene and save the family from ruin, arguing that it was my responsibility as the older sister. She even admitted that the property was too much for her to handle, that she was not prepared, and that if I helped her, maybe things could be fixed. She was practically begging for the check to be cashed again. I listened to the whole message. Desperation permeated every word. And when I finally dialed her number, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. She didn't deserve them. I remained calm, but the disgust in my voice was unmistakable when I asked if she really expected my help. After everything that had happened, did she honestly believe that I would fix everything? She stammered, trying to appeal to the family bond as always, but I had had enough of that nonsense. She had done nothing but waste what she was given, and now she was asking me to bail her out. I reminded her of the words she used to dismiss me so easily, words that remained engraved inside me. She had told me to work harder, that I didn't deserve anything. Well, now it was her turn. And I rubbed it in her face. She tried to interrupt, but I wouldn't let her. I told her that I had worked all my life to reach my current position, and no one had ever helped me. I had to fight for everything, especially against her selfishness, privilege, and all the demands that my family imposed on me without resources. And now, when everything was collapsing, did I think I would fix it for her? No, that wouldn't happen. She sounded exasperated on the other end, as if she thought she could manipulate me. She mentioned how I had the money tied up, as if that meant I owed her something. I interrupted her before she continued, expressing exactly my thoughts. "Do you think that means I owe you something?" I exclaimed. "I'm not your backup plan. I don't owe you anything, and I certainly don't owe you my success." I could almost sense her frustration, but she wasn't finished. I made it clear that I had made my decision some time ago, and, unlike her, I wasn't willing to keep making the same mistakes. I hung up without saying another word, without feeling sorry for her. The calls kept coming in, from my mother, my sister, even some distant relatives, all with the same story, similar excuses, and the same desperate plea for help. They were all looking for someone to take the blame for their failures, but none would get anything from me. I no longer answered their calls. I didn't need to. In the end, they wouldn't receive a penny from me, not a single penny, and I felt no remorse. Update 4. The room remained tense. Everyone sat in nervous silence, exchanging uncomfortable looks. The dust had not settled since the last family meeting. The family was still reeling from the consequences. My parents had spent recent days begging me. Playing the part of repentant victims, they begged for forgiveness. But their words always sounded empty. Then, just when I thought the sound of their pleas would become unbearable, my grandfather called a family meeting. He hadn't taken part in the post-dinner chaos. He had chosen to simply observe. Now was his moment to speak. I saw my parents sitting there, still looking disheveled from the experience. I knew that this conversation would be etched in our memories. My sister was also there, her face red with embarrassment, her eyes darting, as if she could change opinions with a single glance. Grandfather took his place at the front, imposing as ever. His piercing eyes cut through the tension. Without a word, he took his place at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something colder, more determined. I took a seat in front of him, unsure of what to expect. I had learned that nothing with this family was simple. Grandfather began, his voice breaking the uncomfortable silence. He said calmly that we were probably all wondering why we had been called to this meeting. Then he added that the time had come to fix things. The time for excuses was over. My sister stirred restlessly, folding her arms firmly as if preparing for confrontation. My parents exchanged nervous glances. Grandfather continued, stating that for too long he had observed my parents' foolish decisions and how my sister had turned out to be more disappointing than anticipated. He acknowledged having been too passive and lenient for too long, but that was now coming to an end. The words floated heavily. I held my breath. Unsure of the direction the conversation was taking, Grandfather's voice intensified as he announced changes to his will. He sat up slowly and, with a penetrating gaze towards my parents, informed them that their inheritances were revoked. Those words made an impact, freezing the room. My mother's face turned pale, and my father was left speechless, with his mouth open. Their shock was evident. My sister's expression changed to one of disbelief. Her mouth was half open as she exchanged glances with my grandfather and our parents. I knew something significant was going to happen, but I didn't expect this outcome. Grandfather's statement resonated, reverberating in the silence. My sister, unable to keep her composure, gasped in astonishment before asking how he could do such a thing. She demanded to know why he was punishing her, asserting her innocence. Grandfather did not hesitate, interrupting her. He said that she had lived perpetually with a sense of privilege, believing she deserved everything, and that my parents encouraged her selfishness. He went on to explain how my parents created an environment where I constantly had to prove my worth, where my effort was taken for granted, while my sister's demands were always indulged. Then she turned to my parents, her eyes narrowed with anger. "They helped no one," she said, her voice low and cutting. "They disabled their daughter with their favoritism and set up their own daughter for failure with their selfishness. Now the bill is coming in." My mother was drying tears with a handkerchief, but they didn't just express sadness. They represented shame. My father kept his fists clenched on the table, knuckles white as he searched for defensive words, but Grandpa prevented him from speaking. His gaze cut through the room like a blade. My sister was visibly trembling, her face red with humiliation. Her mouth worked as if seeking to undo what Grandpa had just said, but the words did not come. He remained silent, stunned, his gaze alternating between Grandpa and me, as if incredulous at the conversational turn. My parents tried to apologize, their voices trembling now. My mother, tears running down her face, whispered her regret, how they never intended to belittle me. My father, sounding weak for the first time, murmured about how they never wanted the circumstances to go that far, but their apologies sounded empty because I perceived malice in their gaze. They just wanted to regain control over the situation that had arisen. Everyone understood that it was preferable not to take sides afterwards, or risk exclusion from the will as well. 2 days later, I received a message from them, their last attempt to access my money. They apologized again, expressing regret for their behavior and asking for forgiveness. But I didn't need to hear it. Words lacked the weight they once had. I had already forgiven them, but that didn't mean allowing them back into my life. Not now, not ever. I just wanted to release the bitterness that had accompanied me for so long in order to move forward to the future that Granddad helped me secure.